Welcome back, everyone. It's a 30 minutes ride today, so let's get straight into a conversation with the guest of the day. I'm joined by a constitutional lawyer and social development advocate, Libros Oshome, for some legal perspective on the political crisis in Ondo State as Aiyedatiwa is set to become acting governor. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Libros. Always a pleasure having you on Politics Tonight. We appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Right. So the new developments in Ondo State is that Governor Aiyedatiwa is proceeding on a medical leave, while his deputy, Lucky Aiyedatiwa, will become acting governor. What is the legal process involved?
Yeah, it is. If you look at, I think, section 190, subsection 1, it's very clear that anytime a governor is proceeding on leave, he transmits power to the deputy governor, who will act as the governor, throughout the time he's out, on leave, until he transmits another letter to the State House of Assembly, informing them of his return. And then also, to cover the situation like that of Aiyedatiwa, section 190, subsection 2, you remember the doctrine of necessity in 2010, subsequently the case in Taraba in 2013, necessitated the amendment where it was subsection 2 says, if the governor is out of the state for 21 days, then the State House of Assembly shall, by simple resolution, mandate the deputy governor to act, instead of the governor. And as far as I can remember, Governor Aiyedatiwa has been out of Ondo State for more than 21 days. He's been in Ibadan. I think this new transmitting or transmission of power is as a result of the peace, brokered by Mr. President that started, I think, a few weeks ago, where some members of the House of Assembly, some members of the political class in Ondo State were invited to Abuja. There were allegations at that time that the deputy governor was asked to write an undated resignation letter in the event that the Aiyedatiwa faction or the Aiyedatiwa camp, are not comfortable with his style. Then they can throw in that resignation letter. And I think that meeting continued yesterday also. And so I think it's what we are seeing now is a fallout, because the man, for all intents and purposes, has practically been on medical leave. So it's not just proceeding on another medical leave, it's been on medical leave. But I think the fear has been maybe that the deputy governor in acting might oust permanently the sick governor. So I really don't know what their fear is. But it's all politics anyway.
You've just established that after the 2010 amendment to the Constitution, it is supposed to be a straightforward matter for the deputy governor to take over when the governor is indisposed. Why then do you think this became a big issue?
Yeah, you see, quickly, permit me, so that people will understand, it's a very straightforward matter. It's not supposed to be a big issue. Yes, section 90, if you permit me to read quickly. Section 90, subsection 1 says, whenever the governor is proceeding on vacation or otherwise unable to discharge the function of his office, he shall transmit a letter, a written declaration to the Speaker of the House of Assembly to that effect. And until he transmits to the Speaker of the House a written declaration to the contrary, the deputy governor shall perform the functions of the governor as acting governor. That has been the position until the case of Aiyedatiwa. Subsection 2 was subsequently amended in 2010. Amendment number 1 says, in the event that the governor is unable or fail to transmit the written declaration mentioned in subsection 1 of this section, within 21 days, the House of Assembly shall, by a resolution passed by a simple majority of the votes of the House, mandate the deputy governor to perform the functions of the office of the governor as acting governor until the governor transmits a letter to the Speaker that he is now available to resume his function as governor. It is straightforward. The problem here is, like I said the last time, a situation where the governor is contesting for an election almost all the members of the State House of Assembly of his party are bankrolled by the governor. The governor also single-handedly appoints members of the cabinet. And by virtue of Section 189, it mandates the cabinet, if the governor is incapacitated, mandates the cabinet to transmit a letter or to set up a medical panel to examine the governor's, to declare the governor is incapacitated. But the question is, these are people who are handpicked by the governor. Who amongst them will be bold enough to say that, yes, the man who appointed me is incapacitated? In Nigeria, because we are highly religious, even though less godly, he will be, that such a person will be termed an ingrate, a blackmailer, like Dora Akuile was called names when he said he couldn't find Mr. President in 2010. So in the same vein, the State House of Assembly members are almost handpicked and bankrolled by them. Wike recently said in Rivers State, when he was governor, almost everybody, all of them, he bought their farms. He paid for them. He campaigned for them. He practically saying, I installed them. So any action of that house will be viewed from the prison of being an ingrate. So, and then also, which member, you saw that rather than the members of the State House of Assembly activating the instrumentality of Section 190, subsection 2, they are rather thinking about to impeach a deputy governor who is insisting that the right thing should be done. It is, the constitution is straightforward. It is the human error, it's the human factor in all our dealings that consistently has put stumbling block in the way of, in the will of progress or in the will of our democratic progress. Because in theory, the law is very clear. But in practice, the human beings who are supposed to implement the law will throw spanners, all kinds of spanners in the wheel. And to the extent that it took Mr. President's intervention, which ordinarily ought not to be. The business of Mr. President intervening in a matter that ordinarily the law is clear. But since the lawmakers have refused to act, Mr. President also not wanting a lawless, state in his hands, had to intervene. So these are the challenges that we'll have consistently with our democratic activists or our democratic actors. I do not, in all honesty, really, I do not think it should be a big deal. But if it's a big deal now, then people will now be subsequently calling for another amendment that if the State House of Assembly fails to act within 7 days after the 21 days, that once the deputy governor transmits a letter to the State House of Assembly informing them of the situation, then automatically he can act in that position. Maybe that's where we might eventually get to. Because really, the way the governors treat the deputy governors, they do not even treat them as though they have a joint ticket. The governors treat the deputy governors as errand boys because the Constitution did not specifically, give functions, donate functions to the office of the deputy governor, even though it is a joint ticket. If somebody cannot emerge as a governor without having a running mate.
Mr. Libros, this last issue you just raised, the governor and the deputy governor, does it have anything to do with the law?
Yes, because the law is silent on the functions of the deputy governor, except those assigned to him by the governor. You find out that the governors now treat the deputy governors as though they are even lower in the ladder than special advisors or even members of the House of Assembly. You find situations where the governors, if the governor is not in good terms with the deputy governor, he does not even give him any function. We saw in the case of Ondo is the recent one. There are so many. Ondo is fresh, where the governor is relinquished of all his, deputy governor is relinquished of all his functions. And he's just there. It's almost as if he's occupying the office, even though it is a constitutional requirement, but he's occupying the office at the mercy of the deputy of the governor. It shouldn't be. It's a joint ticket. Functions should be properly spelled out and donated to each office, and let each office act properly. And in the event that the governor is incapacitated, we don't need to wait for the House of Assembly, who in most cases because of our peculiarity, are bankrolled by the governor. We need the office of deputy governor should have, to some extent, some powers to be able to check the excesses of the State House of Assembly, like we have seen, displayed in Ondo State. But because the court on its own cannot just step in except matters are brought to them. And we also know, like we say here, the windmill of justice grinds slowly but surely. But we forget that justice delayed is justice denied. The Ondo State deputy governor filed a matter in court, which was in court for a long time. And in some cases, you remember Kogi and some other states, whose deputy governors were impeached unceremoniously. They went to court. Before the court eventually gave verdict, their tenure had lapsed. It became an academic exercise, even though the court instructed that all their salaries and emoluments will be paid. But how many of them received such salaries and emoluments?
All right. So let's get back to...
How many of them actually received those salaries and emoluments?
Yeah. So let's get back to the role of the House of Assembly members on this. I know the law permits the Speaker to appoint a physician to ascertain a governor's state of health and take a division. But do you think the Assembly acted well in this regard?
Yeah, quickly, if you also, since you have brought in that one, that's section 189, that the governor or deputy governor shall cease to hold office if by resolution passed by two-thirds majority of all members of the Executive Council of the state, it is declared that the governor or deputy governor is incapable of discharging the functions of his office. That's the area I told you that the commissioners appointed by the governors are to meet, and they are the one that will kickstart the process of saying that the governor is incapacitated. Which of them will be bold enough to take such steps that will not be called an ingrate in Nigeria today? And then once that declaration is verified, the declaration in paragraph A of this subject is verified, after such medical examination may be necessary, but a medical panel established under subsection 4 of this section in the report to the Speaker of the House of Assembly. And then it now says further, where the medical panel certifies in its report that in its opinion, the governor...
Mr. Libros? Right, so tonight we'll focus on the Ondo political crisis as Aiyedatiwa is set to become acting governor. And I've been speaking with a constitutional lawyer and social development advocate. Mr. Libros Oshoma, if you can hear me, please go on with your submission.
Yes, I can hear you.
Please go ahead.
So, like I said, in this case, it is the medical panel, it is the state executive council that will kickstart and initiate the process of declaring that the governor is incapacitated after a medical examination. And the speaker cannot on its own sign a resolution and put it in and gazette it. It must start from the state executive council. But in this case, a state executive council, like I have said, appointed and nominated by the governor, and you ask them to declare that the governor is incapacitated. And then you also now have a state assembly. In that case, the functions of the state assembly says the medical panel to which this section relates shall be appointed by the Speaker of the House of Assembly of the state and shall comprise 5 medical practitioners in Nigeria and 1 who shall be the governor's personal physician. So, if the House of Assembly, the state executive says, oh, the governor is incapacitated, and a medical panel is set up by the speaker also, how are speakers, please remind me again, how are speakers appointed in Nigeria? There must be an influence of the governor, who he wants, where it has been zoned to, the person he wants in that place where the speakership has been zoned to. The speaker is seen to be loyal to not the state, but to the governor. And this is the same speaker. You now say, go and declare that the governor is incapacitated. So these are the challenges. That's why I said it is the human factor that consistently, throws spanners in the works. And the way it is, just like Chinua Achebe said in Things Fall Apart, since the human factors are consistently looking for how to circumvent the system, what we should also do is to find ways to amend, to give checks and balances to each offices, like the office of the deputy governor. There should be a position where, in the event that the House of Assembly failed to act, here you have the functions of the state executive to initiate the process of declaring that the governor is incapacitated or the deputy governor. Then you have the function of the State House of Assembly in setting up a medical panel, and then the Speaker initiating the process. But the only person who is not reckoned with in all of this is the deputy governor himself, or anybody that is supposed to take over power thereafter. It does not have a role to play here. After 21 days, the office of the Speaker failed to act to initiate the process. Can't the deputy governor do a letter to the Speaker informing them of the situation, and immediately that letter is received, that power is transmitted automatically, provided the days for doing that had lapsed?
All right.
In the case where it becomes very glaring, where there is an impossibility. So if there's a quagmire, you can now have resort to court for interpretation. I think that would give a balance and a role to all members of the team to play in this case. Otherwise, we'll be begging a governor who is incapacitated to transmit a letter. We'll be begging a House of Assembly that is even incapacitated and tied to the apron string of the governor to initiate processes. And, even now as we speak, you remember the governor himself, there were allegations that his signature were false. What is even the guarantee that the letter that was eventually transmitted had not been written long ago, but was kept somewhere?
So in this same situation, Mr. Libras, in this same situation, the deputy governor was compelled to sign an undated resignation letter during the recent meeting with stakeholders. Let me ask you, does such an action hold water in law, and what is the legal implication?
Yeah, the question is that when does a resignation letter takes effect? It will take me back to the provisions of the law. I think section 309 or so. Please permit me so that I don't give you wrong section. But a resignation letter takes effect from I think section, but it's either section 308 or section 309 or so on the effects, on the applicability of a resignation letter. The resignation letter is not effective until it is submitted to the person to whom it's supposed to be received. A resignation letter, we remember in the case of, I think it wasn't Murtala Yaku, it was an Adamawa matter, where the resignation letter was submitted to the deputy governor's alleged resignation letter was submitted. Yes, section 306, subsection 1, save as otherwise provided in this section. Any person who is appointed, elected, or otherwise selected to any office of it may resign from the office by writing under his hand addressed to the authority or person by whom he was appointed, elected, or selected. The resignation letter of any person from any office established by this constitution shall take effect when the writing signifying the resignation is received by the authority or person to whom it is addressed, or by any person authorized by that authority or person to receive it. So in this case, a resignation letter is just a mere document which will not take effect until it is properly, in the case of the deputy governor, addressed to the State House of Assembly, for example. That is when it will take effect. Or addressed to, I think, the State House of Assembly, or not the governor now. So, but in this case, there's an undated resignation letter. Whether, as at now that it's in the public domain, whether that resignation letter was voluntarily written or was compelled, it's a matter that the court will subsequently determine in the event that the letter is eventually used. But my position here is that it ought not to get to a stage. It is laughable that we now have to extract a resignation letter, an undated resignation letter from a deputy governor to before the law, before the actors will allow him to act under as prescribed by the Constitution, which is the ground norm of the country. That's the saddest part of it.
Right, quickly in 30 seconds. I mean, despite constitutional provisions, this crisis lingered. Do you think the law needs amendment? In 30 seconds.
We need to change our behavior if we really are practicing constitutional democracy. What we are practicing is oligarchy. It's not constitutional democracy. It's the rule of Babasokwe and not a constitutional democracy. Otherwise, the constitution as it is, as I've read it to you, without amendment, it's perfect. But because of our attitude to constitutional development, that's why we now need to tweak it a bit to give a function to the office of the deputy governor in this case.
Right. Thank you so much. I've been speaking with a constitutional lawyer and development advocate, Mr. Libros Oshoma, as we focus on Ondo political crisis as Aiyedatiwa is set to become acting governor. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Oshoma. Sadly, we cannot ascertain whether or not we have heard the last about this matter, but we will continue to monitor this development as it unfolds. Thank you so much for watching. That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But the conversation continues from here. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. I am Olajumoke Olatuji.